Let's talk about Paul George. So, Paul George is probably leaving the Clippers this offseason, and let's talk about that real quick. The Clippers are a team which are complicated. They're one of the better teams in the NBA, but also they're one of the more expensive teams in the NBA. They're a team which has consistently put themselves at the top of the Western Conference, but have never been able to go to a final or to really have any success, even though they signed and have signed some of the greatest players in the world to be a part of their organization. With this, we can see guys like Paul George, and when they signed him, he was just coming off of his Indiana years where he was an All NBA caliber player. Uh, then we have a guy like Kawhi Leonard, obviously two-time Finals MVP, champion, one of the better players, right, in the entirety of the NBA, but also one of the players which is most inconsistent in the league. Kawhi Leonard for this team has been one of the better players when he is actually healthy, but when he's not, he's kind of a negative for this roster. Now, for the Clippers, they've always looked to be better. Their owner, Steve Ballmer, just paid like $2 billion for a new arena for the Clippers, and it's probably the dopest arena that I've seen in a while. Paul George, and now he has a player option for 2025. So that means that next season he decides if he's staying in the Clippers or not. Now, this season, he had a pretty good season. He actually was able to score pretty efficiently, scoring 23 points, 5 rebounds, and 3 assists. Meanwhile, shooting 41% from 3, 90% from the free throw, and 47% from the field. So he almost shot 50, 40, 90. He was amazing. He was an amazing second option. And in the playoffs, his whole team choked. But I will say that also the Clippers going into the playoffs had been a team which people knew weren't going to win this season, because even though, yes, their team looks great on paper, their team wasn't that good when it came to actually stepping up. They have notorious playoff chokers in their roster. I'm not talking about Kawhi Leonard or Paul George. And as soon as Paul George went down, that was kind of it. No, as soon as Kawhi Leonard went down for the Clippers, that was kind of it. Now, with that being said, what do I think about Paul George and his situation? First, I want to make clear that if he were to go to any other roster, which has enough cap space, he could get more money than what he's going to get from the Clippers. The Clippers have to make decisions with guys like James Harden, PJ Tucker, and guys like Bones Highland, which have a team option this year or a player option. And they also have to make decisions with a guy like Westbrook or with a guy like Kawhi and his big contract. I do believe the next season they are going to try to have a great team out there, an exciting team. And I think that even with their struggles, they are going to try to put superstars out there just because since they have their new arena, they need to generate ticket sales. They need to have good teams, and they need to keep themselves in a good position. But I also think that they're not planning to spend all of this money on Paul George if they could like sign and trade him or get more money elsewhere from another option. One of the options obviously is that Paul George takes his player option and then gets a contract next season. But I look at this as highly unlikely, as Paul George is already 34 years old, and this will probably be his last big contract ever in the NBA. So you need to squeeze as much money as you can out of this, because after this, you're not getting anything better. You've already declined greatly, and you have to go compete for a championship with what's left of your prime instead of sitting in a bad Clippers team, which I'm sorry, but has shown to you that you're not going to win anything. So if I were the Clippers, what I would do is take Paul George, talk to him, make him decline his player option, and then sign and trade him to another team. The problem is that Paul George can go to another team, compete for a championship, and not affect the other team if they have enough cap space. And what I mean by this is, let's say Philly, which is normally the team which has looked to sign Paul George the most. Philly has completely been entranced with getting Paul George, and they have enough cap space to get Paul George anywhere. A team like Golden State could give up Clay and a few other pieces to put around Kawhi Leonard and James Harden and Russell Westbrook to really make the team pop a little bit more, right? They could trade for younger pieces, or they could trade for pieces that are like win now. They could really go to any team and just try to find a star in the making, you know. Paul George is a guy which would have to be traded to a contender or to a team which wants to make a playoff push next season. Obviously, teams like Boston are not going to cut the chase. The Mavs could, but I think it would be too expensive to have him, Kyrie, and Luka. And I also believe that there is a big problem with Paul George, and it is, how good are you going to be if you go to another team? Paul George has always been known to be like the Kyrie of small forwards. He's graceful, he's very good at dribbling, he has everything in his bag. But when it comes to him having a consistency in his seasons, and when it comes to them turning up in situations and being consistent with the roster, that has just not been the case for their careers. They play this very graceful game. They know how to dribble. They know how to shoot. It's great watching them. But the problem is that you don't know which version of them you're getting each season. Paul George in some seasons has looked like the best player on a finals team when he was with Indiana. When he was with OKC Thunder, he looked like the MVP of the league. But then when he got to the Clippers, he's had a few seasons where he's looked like Tobias Harris, and he's had other seasons where he's looked like one of the greatest players in the world. And I say all of this just to say, like, this season was great. He got an all-star appearance, he shot great, and he really was one of the better players. And the 2021 season was also great. But then you look at a season like 2022 or 2023, and it's like in those seasons he was heavily inhibited by injury. And even though he gets all-stars because he's famous. He's very famous in NBA circles. So, in my opinion, if you're investing in Paul George, what is Paul George going to bring to the table? If he can play like he did this season, then any team would take him in a heartbeat. He played 74 games. He was the leader for the Clippers for most of the season when Kawhi didn't play. And in the playoffs, he tried to get his team over the hump as much as possible, even if it wasn't successful in the end. But if you're getting a Paul George which is going to get injured or is going to have problems all season, then why would you pick him up? This is why I think that Philly should pick him up. Let go of Tobias Harris, bring in Paul George, and that way you have three players which can really get it done for you. We already know that Embiid, when healthy, could get you to 50 wins in a season because he's that good. And I know that a lot of people hate on Embiid. A lot of people don't like him because he's not successful in the playoffs. A lot of people don't like him just because he's kind of a troll and he just likes having fun with the media and he doesn't take anything too seriously, which also translates to a lot of people hating him because they look at his games in the playoffs and they're like, wow, this guy doesn't take anything seriously. So I think that Paul George should go to Philadelphia. I think maybe a sign and trade, right? Get some picks, get something, and that would help the Clippers. But for Philadelphia, they can straight up just sign Paul George to more money that he's going to get from the Clippers, to a better situation where you're going to be surrounded by stars and players which are actually going to add to what you do, and to a situation where you could be the piece that gets them over the hump. For the Clippers, we've seen that there is no piece that can get them over the hump that's not maybe a complete replacement of a player. And what I mean by that is, unless you're going to bring another player in, another superstar in to replace a Paul George or to add to Paul George and Kawhi, what you've done hasn't been successful. So, in my opinion, I think Paul George is probably a 76er this summer. I think that as soon as the free agency opens, he's probably going to decline his player option, get as much money as he can, and play out his years in Philly. If not, then he'll stay a Clipper and probably not win anything with this roster unless they make some big moves. But yeah,